Thank you, everyone. In the interest of time, I believe we have to finish sooner than expected. So, in the interest of time, I'll just go straight into it. Vignesh is someone I've known for many, many years. We were in the same university for our masters. And then in Delhi, we worked in the parliamentary circles at the same time. And then he was a junior of mine during my PhD phase as well. And I think it's his PhD that's culminated in his latest and his first book, actually, The Dravidian Pathway. Uh, Vignesh, before we go into the Dravidian pathway, I'd just like you to give us a sense of the term Dravidian itself as a political term. Because, I mean, forget the Sanskrit roots, all of that. Forget the fact that, I mean, as far as I know, it was a missionary, a very accomplished missionary who first uses the term Dravidian to club the languages of South India that are not descended from Sanskrit. But at what point does that transition from being an almost academic term into a term of political identity and self assertion?
Thank you, Manu, and thank you all for being here. And yes, this is my first time here at Kerala, and then it's nice to be in the company of a college senior. Nice kind of a brotherly vibe. But thanks for actually sorting out the Sanskritic roots controversy and then philologists. But once uh, Robert Caldwell had his book and the word Dravidian used very actively. The first political transition of the term happens with Ayodhi Dasar. So he's a medical practitioner, and he's one of the first proto-Dravidians, as we may say. So the Dravidian movement, as we understand today, one of the first makers of such a movement or such an identity is Ayodhi Dasar, who not just makes the movement, or who just not just makes the term Dravidian political but also administrative. So he tells the Parayars of Madras at the time to identify and report themselves as Dravidians, not Parayars, in the census exercise. So that's where the word Dravidian first picks up. It gets a political life. And then there is the non-Brahmin manifesto, which was again a fight over redistribution of opportunities and resources in 1916, when you realize that a small group of community or a small group of people has a large disproportionate share in government positions or in positions of power. So it was a claim for socio-economic and educational mobility of the backwards. And then it goes on. Then it meets Periyar and it meets Tamil Shaivite saints, and then Annadurai, Kalaignar, MGR, and so on.
So it begins with an anti caste kind of pitch. Since you mentioned the Brahmin and non Brahmin problem, one of the things is that the concept of the non Brahmin itself, in many ways, is an imagined construct, right? It's not as if the non Brahmin is a monolith. There's heaps of castes within. They have their own casteism, they have their own internal dynamics. But one of the, I think, the trump cards that allowed Dravidianism to grow was the fact that they were able to club these communities and say these are non Brahmins and they are one category, one group, and the Brahmins are another. Now, that itself is interesting, right? The creation of that concept as non Brahmin is this unifying force for all these diverse groups.
It is, and it is an outcome only of political labor. There's no other explanation but political labor. And the political labor starts like this. Let's take Ambedkar for a moment, who theorizes the Brahmin and the Dalit in the most eloquent manner and in the manner that it exists. And there's just one definition of caste system that we would need, which is from Ambedkar, which is there is no caste, there are only castes. So with that line, he theorizes the two pivots of caste system. And as argued by another eloquent scholar, Brahmin is a no entry zone, Dalit is a no exit zone in one way or the other, as theorized by Ambedkar. But the tension and the violence does not come between these two pivots, but in the middle and the bottom. The reason being resources are scarce and opportunities are low, and therefore the fight is high. And there is no luxury of trying to wait, because you can't. Hunger doesn't wait. Hunger is the most impatient driving force ever. So Periyar works in these two regions, in these two spectra, which is the middle and the lower. And it is much like, for an audience that is not from Tamil Nadu, it is much like how Kanchiram worked. So Kanshiram also worked with the middle and the lower. Therefore, there was the Bahujan vision from Kanshiram. And there's this interesting line that Kanshiram says, which I'd want to slip to Hindi for a moment, which is, अगर गांव और बस्ती में त्योहार अगर गांव और बस्ती में दंगा मच गया है, that is, if the village and the colony fight, then गांव के पंडित रावल और पटवारी के यहाँ त्योहार है, which is the village's chiefman, accounts keeper, and the priest will celebrate. So that kind of, where therefore Periyar goes from, village to village on caste association meetings, which is also a book that I just helped translate. So Periyar speaks in caste associations, and the first line that he starts with is, "There's nobody above, there's nobody below." And therefore, you're able to pull this broad array of, caste groups who work as interest groups. So caste groups are not just social groups, but they're interest groups who work for their own recognition of their grievances, redistribution of resources and opportunities, and representation in power. So that's how the Dravidian movement or the Dravidian identity is a forged identity. It is an identity that is created and also subscribable. And how does Periyar go about doing it? The Indian social system is based on hierarchy, and a certain kind of hierarchy where it moderates your aspirations and subjugates yourself. As an elite, there's nobody that needs to come to a subaltern and say, "You are lower than me." The subaltern will do it onto himself. So because the self is a subjugated self. So Periyar says, flip it, try respecting yourself first, and then let's talk politics. So self is sovereign, and then social equality first, and then economic equality later. And he had Ambedkar's help throughout.
As I understand it, you're essentially saying that the internal dynamics of these castes existed, but they were also taught and in some ways brought about to think of themselves as interest groups that could coalesce in order to achieve certain ends. We'll come to Periyar, but before that, now this conversation around caste coalescing and demanding certain things is happening against a larger context, which is colonialism and the battle that the nationalists are leading against colonialism. And this is something that you see is often used as a critique of Periyar as well. That in some ways, not just Periyar, Phule, Ambedkar, all of the caste-based reformers are often accused of subordinating nationalism to their quest for caste justice, which some people interpret and read as, oh, they were actually pro-British, or they even benefited from the British and chose to support the colonial state because their agenda was not political independence, it was social liberation and change. And that's interesting because Periyar also mourned Independence Day, I think, as a day when Brahminism replaced colonialism and so on. So that's also an interesting dynamic, right? The fact that Dravidianism is emerging in a context where it's often picking fights with the nationalists. And there's also the accusation that the Congress, which represents the chief nationalist vehicle, is a Brahminical vehicle.
So I'd like to sort of go to Chris Bailey for a moment, where he says in Madras presidency, because of the presence of Rayatwari system, etc., and for all sorts of reasons, we can read Aloysius and all, the caste hierarchies were not solidified in rural hinterlands, unlike UP and Bihar. They were consolidated and solidified in Madras city. So, and therefore Eugene Irshik's works is fantastic. The Dubashis are replaced with exams, and now you have exam writing government officers. And because of an edge that the elite at the time had, which is the Brahminical elite that had, they were able to sort of crack these exams, and they were much a part of the British government at the time. So, but when they found a moment to be able to subvert the system, they say now nationalism is our trope. But the non-Brahmin movement's argument is that let's make the state work. I think they like Hobbes more than Locke. I think they read Locke's social contract theory, but they believe in Hobbes because these are all poor people. You can't sort of wage a revolution without any kind of a support system. So they said, let's make the state work for ourselves, speak to them. And in all fairness, they did not believe in debates. They believed in conversations. And even today, we've all learned to sort of talk over one another. But I think thanks to Kerala Litfest and one such place where people are speaking to each other. They said plurality can be celebrated and difference needs to be embraced. So for difference to be embraced and plurality to be celebrated, people need to talk to each other and the state needs to be engaged with. And that's their argument. And Periyar said, the price that I will pay is legitimacy. because the DMK or the Dravidian movement is still, criticized as or discredited or criticized as an illegitimate movement because it supported the British or worked with the British. But Periyar said that doesn't matter as long as the poor and the subalterns are able to get educated, and the poor and the subalterns are able to get opportunities, might as well sort of take the plunge. And they continue to do that even today. They are fantastic with administrative system of India. You have the best bureaucracy in Tamil Nadu, but still, you are a political party that is not a part of the union in the way that you imagine.
It's interesting that you use the word flattening a lot in the book. That the goal of the Dravidian movement was to flatten caste differences among the coalition of castes that worked for it. But in many ways, coming a little bit to the present, they've not really succeeded in flattening caste altogether, right? So in many ways, although that goal was articulated 100 years ago, and while the Dravidian movement is still alive, why do you think it is that caste still continues to operate even within the Dravidian movement?
So when I mean flatten or when I write flatten, it is in the secular spaces or non-private spaces. So you caste groups come together as interest groups, negotiate, but go back to being their own castes in private spaces. And in my book also, I write that may need or that continues to need one or two more rounds of politicization, or maybe more. And of course, trying to subvert something as primal as caste system, because it's rooted in supremacy and it allows everyone to feel superior. As long as you have someone below, or you think you have someone below, you will want to sort of support the system. It's not a binary like race. It's basically spliced in many ways with many stories. And in these cases, there are no facts. There are only narratives, right? And there is no truth. Forget, no facts, and there's definitely not truth. In this context, it is a journey. It continues to be a journey. And make no mistake, the violence against Dalits today, or let's say lower caste groups, is an outcome of the Dravidian movement in the sense that it delivered. So let's say between KLF2026, which is 1968, and now 4 or 5 weeks ago, there's this person called Kavin who was killed. Between KLF2026 and Kavin, one, KLF2026 is marked by arrogance, impunity, political viability, and also, dominance and wealth, and affluence. But Kavin is an outcome of insecurity. Kavin is an outcome of, the last resort of trying to sort of have some kind of a superiority. And if we were to compare apples to apples, KLF2026 is comparable to a Dharmapuri riots in 2012. There, people were not burnt, but degree certificates were burnt. So burning of degree certificates is essentially, I will kill the markers of your mobility because I am also not as dominant as I was to be able to afford to kill you. And throughout all of this, there is another book called the Dravidian Model, which says, the empirical reality to this is the relative rate of growth of Dalits is faster than the relative rate of growth of the lower backward castes. And therefore, the fight for resources is harder. And also in the context of neoliberal economy, where you're raised to bottom, the lower backward caste is also not able to make as much money. Value or the net returns from land as a unit of resource is lower than it used to be before, because now in Raghuram Rajan's smile curve, you are product design and product sales. Everything else sort of, pays you less. And both these are not with us. So the movement continues to perform, but also the movement falls short in being able to address the personal lives of people. And it has not even at that time. My book looks at the movement at the 60s. It looks at the movement in the 60s. Even then, the question of women and the question of private spaces, was continued, was sort of, paused or was, let's say, moderated in a way that it did not yield the way they wanted to.
We'll come back to Periyar. Now, your book has a lot of facts and figures, lots of tables and lots of data that you collated and collected. But what's interesting is that if you look at this period itself, the 1920s, 30s, when there are all these movements bubbling up, right? Everything has an other. So conceptually, you may frame it as the Congress is against colonialism, but often that is personified in the white man, right? Similarly, Hindutva has the Muslim. or Islam and Islamic power, and it's personified in the living Muslim. That's their other. That's what they pose their argument against. And for the Dravidian movement, it's Brahmanism, but it's often the Brahmin who becomes the focus of attack. Now, you address it in the book, and I remember personally, I wrote a column once on Periyar, and someone said that, look, if you actually read the wealth of his writings in Tamil, because most of it hasn't been translated, apparently there's a lot of attacking Brahmins as people, not just Brahmanism as a concept, but as people. That how has that tension been resolved? I know Annadurai worked to a certain extent, and your book argues that over a period of time, the Dravidian movement was able to woo even Brahmins into the movement. But just run us through how that shift takes place.
So Periyar's opposition was to oppression, and the figure of oppression at that time was the Brahmin. And when Periyar was pursuing the Pan-Malayan Dravidian movement, which is in Malaysia and Singapore in the 1920s, it was against the Chettiars, not the Brahmins, because the Chettiars had a problem, created Taipusam for their own, called it Chettipusam, etc. So his argument, I mean, as he mentions in Tamil, he says, if there's a big country and a small country, I will stand by the small country. And if in a small country, if it's a big community and a small community, I'll stand by the small community. And he goes on. And he ends it with women. So he moves from nation, and then religion, class, caste, and gender. So he roots the notion of self-respect in gender, not in nation, not in religion, not in caste, but in not in class, but in gender, which is where he was able to be very compelling. And Periyar is not Marx. Periyar did not theorize. Is theorized posthumously. Periyar was in the business of persuasion. He spoke to very normal looking people, like let's say my grandfather, and he needed to convince them. And he never believed in prodding people. He only believed in shocking them. So he would walk into a meeting, and this is something that Tiruchi Shiva told me in our own parliamentary circles at the time. He said, he'd walk into a meeting and then say, and use the word, if I may, he said, Dasi Magangale, meaning in other words, illegitimate children. And then he says, oh, are you irritated? Why are you irritated? Because that's Shudra translates to that. So Sanskrit doesn't matter, but in Tamil you're feeling pain, isn't it? So that kind of a shock and awe, trying to make people think and be very critical. And the one thing about the Dravidian movement is also, when you're in the business of rationality, then you're a skeptic. And if you're a skeptic, you're not completely confident. So therefore, you listen to a Dravidian movement speaker or a Dravidian speaker, you may go with 5 questions. He will give you 5 answers and give you 10 more questions. But you listen to someone on the other side, they'll empower you. They'll tell you this is what it is. And even you, both of us have friends like that. You go to them, they'll be like, oh, forget all of that. I'll tell you what is. So no footnotes, no citations. So Periyar was that, and he did not mind. He said, if people understood this language, this is the language that I will speak. But Anna says, no, I need to sort of make it about ideas. Because if it's about people, then the movement will have an expiry date.
Anna is Annadurai.
Annadurai. C. N. Annadurai, the first chief minister of Tamil Nadu and also the founder of the DMK. So Annadurai says, and he's also an economist. One of his first books called Panattotam was written about capital accumulation. And he was trained by N.G. Ranga. He did fieldwork in Madras, and N.G. Ranga was again trained by Harold Latsky from the Fabian School. So this is his genealogy. And Anna says the movement needs to be about ideas. And he writes in his own magazine called Dravida Nadu, says, Aryam Irakkum Idam, which is where does Aryanism exist? He says, and he puts Ambedkar's graded inequality in Tamil caste system. He says if a Brahmin ill-treats an intermediate caste, there's a problem, which is a Vellalar. If a Vellalar ill-treats a Thevar, then it's a problem. If a Thevar ill-treats a Nadar, then that's where Aryanism exists. And if a Nadar does that to a Parayar does that to a Pallar does that to a Sakliyar. So that's how he details in that. So the Tamil caste system, in its names, are sort of presented and then said this is how Aryanism or Brahminism needs to be opposed. And he says, don't set streets on fire, set your mind on fire, ignite your minds. And to people who say Dravidian movement is anti-Brahmin, the constitution of the DMK, when the 16th amendment of Indian constitution, which is in 1962, the Indian government passes the 16th amendment to the Indian constitution, which says anybody who's trying to rattle India's integrity or any political party will be disbanded. So the constitution was rewritten, and the person who helped write was VP Raman. He himself was a Brahmin. And even continuing till date, there's no problem with Brahmins. And even the political opposition to the DMK today does not come from Brahmins per se. It comes from Brahminical thought. It comes from the same Shudra castes. It comes from the same Dalit caste groups. So that's the arc.
Between Periyar and Annadurai, now, I mean, this is the core argument of your book also, that although there have been reform movements in different parts of the country, including Kerala, and reform movements and the organizations that these led to have political influence, the Dravidian movement is this rare species or this rare creature where the reform movement was able to become a political party. And that happens when it moves from Periyar to Annadurai. Now, in the process, there are certain changes you alluded to that, he has to compromise, as it were, or make certain changes, move with the times. You use expressions like that in order to amend things in a way that allows the Dravidian movement to become a viable political alternative and not just a social movement. It becomes a movement that's able to recapture power and reshape the state itself. Now, that tension is also interesting, right? When a movement transitions into a party, what kind of contradictions, what did it lead to issues between, say, Periyar and him? That can't have been easy. There would have been birthing pains in making that shift.
In fact, Periyar is given the reins of the Justice Party once they lose the 1937 elections. In 1937, British India had elections where more people voted, or most people voted than before. So they were moving towards universal suffrage. And the Justice Party lost out, and Periyar said, good riddance, because they also were the non-Brahmin elite, and elitist as well. And so the reins of the Justice Party goes to Periyar. And in 1944, he says, stop with the party. And, the party needs to become a social organization. So for the first time, a party becomes a social organization. It's like almost BSP becoming DS4 for a moment in India. But then, like I said earlier, Anna and his colleagues believed in Hobbes. They believed in power. They believed in making state work for people. They believed in democratizing power. They said, we are anyway the peripheries. So if you don't even have a foot in the door with power, being a peripheral person, the state can just come down on you. And Annadurai also learns this lesson in the 1950s anti-Tamil pogrom in Sri Lanka. So he sees the kind of crackdown that happens on Tamils there. And he makes one point very clear. He says the movement needs to be sustainable in its objectives, not in what it's trying to achieve. And that what it's trying to achieve are a set of ideas, which is redistribution, recognition, and representation. So therefore, you don't have, a line or two that you'll hold on to. For example, I want a temple in my house. And even if that house is not mine, I will say first that house is mine, then I will break the other person's house. Then I will try and find and I'll apologize for it again. And then at some point I'll have a temple in my house. Instead, but that is possible for an elite movement. But for a subaltern movement, you need to be able to have flexibility even with strategies. So there was a strategic flexibility which said, let's say Dravida Nadu is one such claim. And Annadurai says, if Dravida Nadu is
secessionism,
yes, having a separate state, Dravida Nadu, or a separate country at the time. And Anna says, if Dravida Nadu is not possible, no problem. We will change the idiom to federalism. And with the federal idiom, we will argue or we will make a case for, empowerment of people. And even today, if you see, in state indicators, Tamil Nadu is second in growth and second in development. And the only state that does high growth and high development. In India, we have, high growth, low development states like Gujarat and Maharashtra. We have low growth, low development states like UP, Bihar. We have low growth and high development states like Himachal and Kerala. But the only state that does high growth, which is second in rank after Maharashtra in economic indicators, and second in rank after Kerala, is Tamil Nadu. So to be a second ranker, isn't it? So that's the kind of interest, which is you start with self-respect, you go to a social equality, you have economic equality, and you also have representational justice, or you aim for it.
You have a chapter on reading rooms in Tamil Nadu, which is very interesting because you essentially argue and demonstrate that it was these reading rooms that allowed this movement, as it became a party, to develop the cadre, to keep the message alive, to draw more people in, and in many ways to educate even the countryside. There were reading rooms where it was party workers who physically even built the structures, etc. Many of these reading rooms are still active, they're still available, etc. Tell us about this network of reading rooms and how that helped the party become a force in politics that also defeated the Congress and essentially wiped it out, in the 1960s.
Um, so Periyar, in his own shock and awe tactic, he was nicer to the people. He was worse with his own partymen. And he basically had one such acerbic conversation with Annadurai and said, you're going to enter the business of compromise. You're essentially going to sell yourself out. The people don't even know what you're speaking. Do even people know what you're saying? And a whole lot of other things. And Annadurai goes back and says, well, the old man has a point. Yes, our people do not possibly understand what we want to achieve. Possibly they won't even come out of their own villages to come and vote. If the landlord there sort of says something, for example, in the DMK, in the first election, in the 67 election, the Raja of Ramanathapuram Raja was defeated by a horse cart puller in his own village. So one of the first instances. And what did Annadurai have? He just had 50,000 boys. So when he split from the Dravidar Kalagam's membership was 75,000, of which 50,000 people moved away, and their median age was 35 or 30 at best. And even in the first cabinet of the DMK, if you take Annadurai out, they're still 35, 36-year-old people. Only Anna makes their average go up. So then Annadurai said, we don't have the resources. So if there's going to be a party office, or if there's going to be a party, organizational space, which could be anything, that will also act as a place where people will come and read, where people will come and speak, where people will come and sort of, talk to each other. And that's how reading rooms started. And even today, 70 years of 1967 to 2025, almost 60 years in power and off power, or in government and off government, the town office of Virudunagar, of the DMK, is still an old newspaper mart where anybody can walk in and walk out. And a very small place. It's a newspaper mart. It continues to be that. And so Annadurai said, we need to sort of build cadres, we need to train cadres, and we need to have some kind of a vocabulary that you build. Now you have an idea, an identity, but that identity needs to go to people. Why should the identity go to people? Because so that they can render their problems in their vocabulary. I will tell my problems. I will tell that my stomach is paining instead of saying my stomach aches. I should have the freedom to be able to say that. So that kind of broad set of vocabulary was built, and these reading rooms emerged. And these reading rooms essentially had one person reading out aloud. The literacy rate in Madras was not high. So there was one person who would read out a newspaper or a pamphlet in the evening, and everybody else would listen, and then they would speak back. So one such 70-year-old that I met, he said, Thambi, Kutramum Dandanayum padichirkingla? I said, what is Kutramum Dandanayum? He said, Crime and Punishment. He read Dostoevsky in Tamil. And he said, how come you're doing this PhD? Who's this person in England? I said, no, it's a French professor, Christophe. I said, it's a French professor, is it? Oh, that's what I wondered. And then he paused, and 2 minutes later he said, but the French were also nasty to the Algerians, weren't they? I said, how do you know? And he then took me to the reading room, and he said, so this is where I read. So that was also written in Tamil. So our chief minister is named Stalin. There are so many people who are named Roosevelt, Voltaire. There are Tamil professors are called Lenin, and then Marx and things like that. And then a series of names also, isn't it? Anbarasan, Arivarasan, they all come from the Sangamera. Pungulali, Kandimoli, all of them come from the Sangamera. So the reading rooms were debating forums. And I also came across this reading room in Tirupur, which was a rice mill till 4:30, a tuition center till 6 o'clock, a reading room till 7:30, and a night school after. So multiple spaces. And that's how 19,000 of such places came up, and 400 such publications came out.
It's quite fascinating because you don't make the point in the book, but when I was reading about the reading rooms, it just struck me that you find the RSS also had to build a network where people had activities to do, and it shows this militaristic like parades and drills and all of that. Whereas with the Dravidian movement, it was reading rooms and books and that kind of exposure and seeding ideas, which I thought was an interesting contrast. Even though often, this is another thought that struck me as I was reading the book, the mechanisms have parallels. Both are organizing, both are about bringing people in, but with very different goals and very different values and principles. We'll speak also about the language issue because this is something that's still pretty potent, the idea of Hindi imposition and what Tamil itself represents. Because just as the word Dravidian obtained a political cadence to it, similarly, Tamil also, from being your mother tongue, ended up becoming a vehicle for assertion. And that's something that still continues. So tell us a little bit about this whole language politics and how that animated the Dravidian movement.
So, language is the most important vehicle to communicate and to speak. And from education scholars to the most emotive speakers, they all say that I think better in if I learn in my mother tongue. So, and also, I mean, there are a whole bunch of papers that have come out from University of College London, which says that mother tongue education is much better for even to pick up logic, science, etc. And then one link language maybe. So at the heart of the movement lies empowerment and socio-economic and educational mobility based empowerment, not some glorious past in Sangam where there was gold and silver and there were some airplanes. No, we don't know. If they were, good. If they were not, no problem.
A quick interjection there. Didn't the Dravidians also engage in a creative reading of history where you romanticize certain aspects of the Sangam era, etc.? There was some
they
creative...
go to an abstract Sangam past where there's no historical evidence. Exactly. So Anna doesn't go to the Bhakti version of or the later Cholas. He goes to an abstract Sangam past. And there's this scholar in Germany who told me that Manimegalai, as mentioned, or Silapadikaram, as written by Kalaignar, is nowhere close to what the Silapadikaram is. Because in Kalaignar Silapadikaram, there's a foreigner who basically criticizes caste system in Tamil Nadu. So they rendered or they made the identity, and for that, what Annadurai realized was you need a past to hark back on. Therefore, I'll go back to I'll go back to a past that's an abstract idea and fill it only with the ideas of equality. So if you read Sangam texts from the Dravidian movement, they will say that, oh, this is women were participating, men and women were the same, there was no caste system. So everything that is part of Indian ethos today is said as, an outsider. For example, even the caste system.
I have a naughty, sorry to keep interrupting you, but this is a naughty question because you're a scholar. You're obviously sympathetic to the Dravidian movement, but you're also a scholar. And this kind of creative reading of history, for you personally, where do you sit on that? I mean, you understand the goals because in the sense, this is what the right also does, or people on the left do it. All political movements do need a mythologized version of history. But as a scholar, does it cause you any sense of dissonance or
No,
discomfort?
It did. Therefore, I read this guy. I read Eric Hobsbawm. Eric Hobsbawm says invented tradition. Therefore, I say Dravidian movement is an identity that was forged, not given. So the only and I'm sympathetic to the Dravidian movement as much as I'm sympathetic to Bahujan Samaj Party, to Kanshiram, to Jyotiba Phule, to Ayangali, to Narayana Guru, etc. So any place where the middle and the lower are trying to come together and work towards empowerment, my sympathies lie there. And even the black movement on that note. One of the former higher education minister of Tamil Nadu in the 1970s wrote a book on the Dravidian movement and the black movement, which was an interesting find as well.
So now, on the question of black, was the black shirt a deliberate choice, given it was Periyar's color? I have to ask.
Black makes me look thinner than I actually am.
We'll go with that answer.
And black is also such an anti-pure color, isn't it? In this notion of purity and purity and purity, oh, I am pure. My father was blue blood, or yellow blood, orange blood. I'm all colors. And black is such a nice color in the sense that, and black is also such a color that is demonized, isn't it? So people couldn't put up with the fact that Lord Rama was black, therefore they painted them blue, and a dark blue. Yeah, and Krishna, Nili Megha Shyama, no, blue again. And so therefore, black is a very useful color that way, and also very less maintenance.
I can see that our scholar has perhaps a political future at some point. He knows how to, turn every answer to his advantage.
He's my teacher.
Ouch.
So this is an alter ego that I created. Otherwise, I'm a socially awkward person. Should know this. So I'm able to sort of no. If you were to break the Dravidian movement with me, I will sit and sort of break it in very creative ways. For example, the women question. For example, the question of neoliberal ethos at today's time. where you don't have an empire anymore. The greatest empire of the world is saying, now I want to be a trader. Now let's do business instead of do the business of empires. So um, as long as the system's working, I'm okay with it. That's my approach.
Okay, come back to the language question.
The language question, in the 50s, the school a set of schools were started after the infamous exit of Rajagopalachari, because he said there is no money. Therefore, on the lines of Varda's scheme of Mahatma Gandhi, no worries, we don't need to find new money. Students can go to school for 2 hours if the school can run for 4, so that we can have 2 batches of 2 hour students. And in the other 2 to 3 hours, you go help your parents. And after some 20, 30 years of social justice, self-respect, and an old man constantly trying to yell in your ears, the people were like, no, I don't want to be, another cobbler after my father. And even the Justice Party went to this British officer called Alfred Chatterton and said, we want to be a Mumbai, we want to be an Ahmedabad. We don't want culture, history, literature, etc. Therefore, Chennai Lit Fest will take some time, I think. So, and they said, no, we want to learn skills. We want to learn skills that are not occupational. And all of that vocabulary adds on, and you just had the First Amendment to Indian Constitution. That was a big problem, which is to bring back reservations after independence. So all of this, Rajaji goes away. And I'm not quoting anybody else but Rajmohan Gandhi, who said all that Rajaji needed to do was...
Rajmohan is his grandson.
Yeah, Rajmohan Gandhi is his grandson, who writes the biography of Rajaji called Rajaji's Story. And he says all that Rajaji needed to do was to say that, I'm giving up on this scheme, but he did not. And Kamaraj comes up, he fields almost 50 people from the Dravidar Kalagam, and in 1957 election, which means the de-Brahminization of the Congress party is starting from there. He starts a whole bunch of schools and then puts midday meal scheme, again helped by another person from the DK called N.D. Sundaravadivelu. He was the secretary. So cut to 10 years later, again, a very tall, senior, glorious man from Delhi says, from tomorrow onwards, it will be Hindi, no English. So you're educated and you lost out. So the protest, or the Tamil language protest, is a cry for empowerment and educational mobility. Therefore, you did not see killing, but self-immolations. The students led the protest. Annadurai needed to go to America to get his throat cancer operation sorted, but he waited 4 days to speak to the students because they were not listening to him. He sat, he persuaded them and said, don't go. The party will take over. And that kind of a movement led to a 2-language policy. It is not Tamil only again. It is Tamil and English. So it is always this notion of empowerment. And even today, under the Congress party, they did not have problems even with, P. Chidambaram giving Hindi language speeches. There's no problem at all. And in fact, I speak Hindi. I was formally trained in Hindi. And that kind of an argument was, put forth and continues to be put forth. So whenever there's an exam that's not in Tamil or not in English, there's a problem. Whenever there are, there are no translations made, then that's a problem. So in other words, Tamil as a language issue or Tamil as an issue is a subaltern issue. It's not an elite-led consensus like Bengali, let's say.
I've been told we need to open up to audience questions soon, but a quick question to again bring it a little bit to the present. Because the Dravidian movement has all these progressive ideals, the core ideology of it is about progress, everyone coming together, wiping out or flattening caste, etc. Do you think it could ever go national? Or because it has emerged in Tamil Nadu through this curious mix of culture, local developments, etc., will this progressive ideology always be limited to that particular cultural zone? That's question number one. And the others also talk a little bit about the ongoing conversation on North-South divide, because you spoke about how Annadurai made it about federalism. And we're living in a time where federalism is again coming up as a major political cleavage. So just cover those two topics and we go to the audience.
No, the Dravidian movement is already national. There are 40 MPs from the DMK or the ADMK that come in. And I think the Dravidian movement's understanding of national is a very constitutive idea of India, that A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F is national, as against somebody from the north will sort of now say how ABCD needs to be written.
Or everything must become Z, Yeah.
Or X, I don't know, because that's where a lot of debate's happening now, isn't it? So that's the argument, which is with the Dravidian movement. So in fact, it's not their limitation, but that's their articulation, which is only if the Dravidian movement is able to sort of articulate the notions of federalism like any other state. That's when the consensus in India will be not like a consensus that was forced, but a consensus that was built. And now adding to north side south divide, they provide for great talking points. But you asked me to be a scholar, so I will be that now
You
more.
don't have to be. You
I am a scholar.
can bring out your political black shirt avatar.
Like I said, I learned from you. So, the anti-caste movement in the north has greatly influenced the Dravidian movement also. Continues to. VP Singh was celebrated in Tamil Nadu because of what he did. Kanshi Ram, the Bahujan Vision, and then Ayangali, and then Narayana Guru, and Jyotiba Phule. The self-respect marriage and the Satyashodak marriage, for example, if you were to think of them. And Periyar and Ambedkar. Ambedkar in 1930s, in 1920s, he goes to caste association meetings to talk anti-caste politics. From 1930s, he only goes to caste abolition conferences, or he names them that. Because now there's this Pune Pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar, and Periyar says, let the old man be, you don't give up. And when there's a forking of the Dalits between Gandhi-led Harijan mobilization and Ambedkar-led, a Panther-style mobilization, or at that time, the depressed classes mobilization, Periyar goes street to street and says that, go with Ambedkar, stick with Ambedkar. So in this context of North-South divide, if we start making politics materially redistributive, what's the problem in India? If you do redistribution correctly, you are solving 9 out of 10 North-South issues. It's only because you want to keep the equilibrium disproportionate is why North-South divide is being asked. Otherwise, the idea of India is a constitutive idea, and there is enough space for federal language. You make redistribution of opportunity and resource equitable and material for a moment. Let's start talking class politics for a moment. And then start understanding that, a labor who was working 8 hours 10 years ago is making less than a labor that's making 8 hours today in real terms. So let's try and solve that disparity, and North-South divide will start becoming about ideas, which is a much better place to be. Now we are in a resource constraint as well. Therefore, it's a lot more, problematic.
Okay, we'll open up to audience questions. You can raise your hands.
Hello, sir. Thanks for your presentation. You have talked on Periyar and at the same time on Sri Narayana Guru. Periyar was once labeled as a British agent, and yeah, it's like that. And Sri Narayana Guru said that colonial modernity gave me this renaissance or reformation or the ideas for reformation. So, how do you look at this?
Can you repeat the last part about what Sri Narayana Guru said?
Sri Narayana Guru said that colonial modernity gave us the ideas for reformation or renaissance that influenced him. Colonial modernity influenced Sri Narayana Guru for his ideas of modernization.
Even in the Dravidian movement, one of the constitutive elements was also the Madras Secular Society, which draws from Western Enlightenment frameworks. And Narayana Guru also engaged. So back in the day, today's tensions that we have, restive anger that we have against one idea is to other, that did not exist. They read broadly. They were okay to sort of make their own, hybrids. They believed in hybrids. They believed in mosaic floors as against marble floors, which you rub and rub and rub and make it white. They were okay with dots here and there. They were okay with fully dotted floors. So that kind of a, reformistic tendency that was picked up at that time allowed for them to embrace difference and then celebrate it. So they were not just celebrating for the sake of it. So Narayana Guru's, I don't see any problem if Western Enlightenment is informing Indian ethos, as long as it is enabling people here. And I think that's what it did. And in many ways, that kind of articulation somehow democratized access, which is, these were not like Sanskritic shlokas, right? That if you are not allowed to say. Freedom and liberty could be said by anybody because it's a foreign language. It allowed you to sort of write, it provided a mutual disadvantage. All those structural cleavages existed. So you could approach it even with differential outcomes. So that's the argument.
It's also interesting that the concept of self-respect is still an expanding category, because at the end of the book, you talk about how the Dravidian movement is now engaging with the queer community and talking about self-respect for the queer community, almost as a natural extension of progressive ideas. Next question.
Thank you so much for that. Uh, a lot of what was discussed was more in the modern idea of caste, right? So, looking at caste as a social institution versus architecture as a physical or a visual representation of identity. Uh, so, you had mentioned that caste flattening and public spaces, while caste retreats into more public private spaces and all. Uh, when we work back a bit into colonial history, where the identity of colonial architecture in Madras was just coming up, it would have had its share of undocumented subaltern contributions and histories. What kind of social relationships existed within this kind of a setup during that time? And what would it mean to, quote unquote, reread histories of this time?
Quote unquote, what, sorry?
Quote unquote, reread history through these discourses of subaltern in architectural identity of colonial Madras? Long question. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
No worries.
See, I'm not trained in architecture, so take whatever I'm saying with a pinch of salt. But this is my sense, visually speaking. Colonial architecture was, inclusive in the sense of its approach, because they needed to do business with everybody. They needed to do business with everybody. They needed a certain kind of balance in an equilibrium in the society for them to survive. So that allowed for opening up of these spaces. Okay? So in terms of that, but then they also did not want to disturb whatever was existing. So colonial architecture or colonial interventions coexisted with already existing separations or already existing segregations. So it was, in other words, adding something to the mix as against, and then hope that there is change, or not even sort of, or as against adding something to the mix to engineer a change. That's my sense of how colonial architecture, for example, the Ripon building instance, for instance, it continues to be, or the Victoria Reading Hall. And because of or the Madras University at the time, or even Queen Mary College, which is Rani Mary Kalluri in Chennai. So all of that. And they also built in places that were also relatively greenfield as against brownfield projects. So that would be my response.
The gentleman here.
Hi, sir. What is your
Vignesh
rebuttal?
Rajahmani.
Huh?
Vignesh, please.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah. What is your rebuttal to J.S.I. Deepak, who says, J.S.I. Deepak, who says Dravidianism is a colonial construct?
First, I don't want to rebut. Okay. Second thing, I will respond to you. Because he's making a case. He's a lawyer. All right. He makes a case because he's a lawyer. Dravidian movement is a colonial construct is one of the laziest arguments that anybody can come up with, because it stoops down to the worst form of debating, which is labeling. And in the business of labeling, the elite always wins. Okay, there's this fantastic paper by this person called Anisha George, who's in APU now. Same act of corruption done by two people, one elite, one subaltern. The act of the elite was considered not to be corruption. The act of subaltern was considered to be corruption. So my response would be no, it is not a colonial construct. It was constructed by people who are as Indian as anybody, okay, and who actually married, British people lesser than the elites. Intermarriage between the elites and the West and British was much more higher than the subalterns. So if you want to play that card, these guys would pass that test also. But I'm not in that business, because when non-Brahmin was defined in the Justice Party, in the Madras Legislative Council, it was, Mohammedans, non-Brahmin Indians, Christians, and Anglo-Indian Christians as well. So it was a broad category. Here, like Manu just spoke about queer movement. We are in the business of going far, therefore we are trying to add as many people as possible. We don't want to go fast anywhere, because if you go far, you'll go well. I think that's the argument. And the notion is to sort of bring as many people as possible together.
Next question, somewhere at the back. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hi, Preetham here. Great session, Vignesh. Looking forward to read your book. the post-independence social justice reform that started in our country kind of has plateaued. We have made great, progress historically, but right now that social justice progress kind of has plateaued. There's not much progress in anti-caste thought processes and real upbringing of people downtrodden. Where do you think in history did we lose the plot? Was it VP Singh's utilization of Mandal Commission as a political tool to help his government survive, or is somewhere else? Your take, please.
There are so many ifs in that question. But for people who are in electoral politics, opportunities are supposed to be sort of reaped. If you don't, you're a stupid politician. So VP Singh picking up a report that was formed 10 years ago, which opened up spaces and opened up politics in very interesting ways in India. I don't think it's not a political tool. Yes, it is a political tool for empowerment. It's not a political tool in a pejorative sense. Again, like I told you, if it was picked up by someone else for other means, we may not have had that argument. So now coming back to where did we lose the plot? I don't think we've lost the plot. It's a wave. You're basically riding in the sea, and you basically take the waves that help you and also sail through the waves that are not necessarily helpful. So in the long arc of history, you keep trying, and you keep trying sensibly and with rationality, right? Because to be able to have politics of dignity in Bihar, in a state where violence was, people were subject to violence even for using a river that was flowing to wash clothes. That even that state produced a Lalu Prasad Yadav, a Ramvilas Paswan, a Nitish Kumar, and a Karpuri Thakur. Goa's first chief minister was Dayanand Bandodkar, who came out of a Bahujan movement, a numerically non-dominant backward caste. And Kanshiram, he went to villages. And even today, you speak to people in the villages, they will tell you, I think they're pretty articulate. And I don't, therefore, the premise of the question, I don't think we've lost the plot. I think the plot is going through its own set of challenges, and it needs to sort of come out. That's where human action and political labor play a role.
Good evening, sir. My question regarding the present politics. What we are seeing, I'm talking about present politics, and ADMK, Dravida party, which is aligning with BJP, which is a right-wing ideology. Do you think that present context, that we are talking about ideology and transformation, and by aligning with BJP, do you think that is it opportunist, or is there any, there is a other definition from your side? I would like to listen from you.
I actually want to add a little bit to that question. You earlier mentioned that the Dravidian movement saw that this is the nature of things and we need to adapt in order to move ahead. Would you then argue that this is also, an adaptation? No.
So, opportunism is not such a bad thing if you're a subaltern politician in India. Because again, I go back to Kanshiram, who says, हाँ मैं अवसरवाद हूँ क्योंकि मुझे अवसर कभी मिले नहीं, which is, yes, I'm an opportunist because I've not been given any opportunities, right? So opportunism, in other words, is a counter-hegemonic proposition to the hegemonic notion of purity. And an elitist force can afford purity. Okay, so coming to ADMK, so the AIA-DMK, not ADMK, AIA-DMK is in a disconnect. The current AIA-DMK is in a disconnect. In the sense, the party's leadership has aligned with the BJP, but not the cadres. So ADMK is a bottom-heavy party because it was built from fans associations. So DMK is a middle and so if you split party into 4 systems, so leadership, district, block, and branch. ADMK is heavy in the block and branch, and they directly engage with the leader because it's a popular leader, and they were made out of fans associations. But the DMK is heavy in 2 and 3 because they were made out of reading rooms, and therefore the district leadership is stronger in the DMK, and they mimic the district administration, Indian district administration, right? So the ADMK leadership is struggling to convince their own cadres that this is the ideological route because they're still in the idiom of MGR and Jayalalitha. So, but they can't go to the DMK also because because the DMK can't be a substitute for the ADMK. So, so that's where Tamil Nadu is at, and this is opportunism and also some kind of, let's say, coercion, which, as expressed by the ADMK, the AIADMK politicians that have left the party, that they've been asked not so nicely to join.
Sadly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Vignesh. Everybody, please clap for him and his future political career. And thank you again for being such a wonderful audience and for showing up in such impressive numbers. Thanks, Vignesh.
Thank you.